The worst thing you can do if you're feeling stuck and blocked as a writer is to just try to sit there and think. We're in the midst of nations clashing, gods playing with mortal lives, big story. I posted a poll on Twitter seeing what kinds of videos you guys would want me to make next, and the winner was something about how I plan my D&D sessions. This video is going to be assuming that you know how to DM and how do you get ideas when you're stuck for new sessions that will be really fun for your players. I think that these ideas also really work for just writing in general, particularly if you're a genre writer. These might be good ideas for getting you unstuck from writer's block on a lot of different projects, not just DMing. Caveat, I have not been DMing for very long. I've only been running a campaign for some of my friends for about a year. I do try to be a little bit more ambitious than just the standard going into a dungeon and hack and slash and you win some treasure at the end. I really try to push myself to come up with some pretty creative plots, keep a lot of variety between our different sessions in terms of the types of adventures they're going on, and yet tying it all together in part of an epic plot. Lately, I have felt kind of stifled in quarantine, but I am going to be planning a new session for them soon, and so I kind of wanted to make this video to force my ass to actually plan that session. So here's 10 tips for how to plan a great session for your players in Dungeons and Dragons, or any tabletop game, I guess it would apply to. Tip number 1 is draw stuff out. So I just am more creative physically putting a pen to paper. I don't know why, but for DMing, this works better for me. For my short stories and books, I usually do most of the writing on computer, but a lot of times when I'm first getting ideas for things or outlining or brainstorming, the freedom of just being able to make marks on paper is really helpful for me. So for me, drawing a world map was one of the more fun aspects of D&D. And so I'll just like draw it on paper and then scan it in because I'm super old school. Drawing out the puzzles and the maps of the rooms, just starting to make lines on paper, even if you don't have all your ideas figured out yet. At one point in my campaign, my players had to blow up this factory. Well, they ended up choosing to blow it up. There were ways to accomplish their goals without blowing it up, but they chose to send it into full nuclear meltdown. It was basically a heist, right? Because they had to like distract guards, sneak around, avoid like pitfalls and traps and stuff. I knew I had to like design the factory in a way that they would be able to pull off an elaborate heist. And I didn't figure that out by sitting there and thinking about it. I figured it out by actually drawing sketch after sketch of a factory and being like, well, they would need some sort of cooling source. Let's make sure there's like a pipeworks where the water is coming in. Okay. And then there's going to have to be a loading dock. In sketching out what a factory for refining magical ore might look like, I ended up building in things that the characters could use in their heist / meltdown plot scenario. So don't just sit there thinking about it, like actually just start drawing it out and sketching it. That's a big tip from me. And if you think digitally and you work digitally and you can do that on an app or on a tablet, you know, more power to you. I'm old school, so for me, I get most of my ideas just sketching stuff out on paper. Tip number 2 is to crowdsource ideas. So if you do not belong to an online community of other DMs, I strongly recommend it. I one day just like got on Twitter. I was just like, I want to follow other DMs on Twitter because I want to get ideas and learn from y'all. And so that thread kind of blew up and I was able to add a whole bunch of DMs and a lot of them followed me back. And now pretty much whenever I'm about to start planning a session, the first thing I do is tweet like, I need to plan a heist, or I need to plan a jailbreak in D&D 5e. What ideas do you have? And I often get lots of really good ideas that way. I've heard that Reddit is really good for getting DM ideas. I don't Reddit, but I'm sure that's great. There's probably Facebook groups for it. Like I would just find some kind of online community of DMs so that you can ask questions and get ideas that way. Tip number 3 is to take inspiration from art. So obviously if you're writing a campaign to try to sell, you cannot be using works of art that are just posted online that you don't have the rights to. but you totally can take inspiration just by like doing Google image searches. I'm not usually good at thinking through some of the physical visual details that I need to describe to my characters to make a setting really come alive. Knew I wanted there to be like a swamp town. I didn't really have like a clearer picture in my head than that. So I Google fantasy landscape swamp town and I found this picture. Oh, cool. Like all the houses are up on stilts up above like this peaty bog, and the roofs are thatched with straw, and there's a wide porch out front of each of these like ramshackle homes. And all of a sudden the visuals of the campaign are occurring to me and I'm able to describe it in a much more enveloping way. Tip number 4, along with stealing stuff from art, steal plots from art. So I would highly recommend stealing from certain TV shows. I think TV shows that work really well are episodic genre shows, kind of an adventure of the week type show. Some good examples are Star Trek has lots of awesome ones that can be adapted for a fantasy setting. Firefly, for Western type plots. Rick and Morty, Community, even though those are like contemporary and sci-fi, they have really intricate adventure of the week plots. And that will give you a really good idea of pacing. If you think about the number of story beats that you might see in an episode of Community, that might be the perfect length of beats for a 2 to 3 hour D&D playing session. For my next session that I'm running, we're going to do a time loop session where they repeat the same day over and over and over again, and it's actually a jailbreak. Without using their magic, they're in like a magic repressing dungeon. They're going to have to like figure out the minute by minute schedule of everything that happens in this one day in the prison. And because of reasons, they're stuck in a time loop and they'll have to run it a few times, learn the patterns of the jail so that they can escape from the jail. And that, of course, is a trope that you see in episodes of Star Trek. It's the plot of the movie Groundhog Day. I'm sure like lots of other genre fiction have used the time loop. So stealing from TV shows, particularly adventure of the week genre TV shows, is a really great way to get ideas for plots for your sessions. Tip number 5 is pretty obvious. I feel like maybe I don't even need to say it, but is just look in the monster manual and the Dungeon Master's Guide for inspiration. So if you've been DMing for a while, maybe you don't like look at these as often because you sort of have it, you feel like you have it all in your head, but those ideas for like building sessions in the Dungeon Master's Guide can be really helpful, even if they're sort of basic. Sometimes we need to be reminded of the basics as writers. And just looking in the monster manual and like finding a really cool monster that's the challenge rating that you kind of want for your culminating encounter of your next session. Where would be the spookiest place to run into this monster, or how would you get your characters to interact with this monster? Also, if you come across a monster who's really cool with a challenge rating way above anything your party can handle, that you can still incorporate that character by them needing to like use it to cause a diversion or sneak past it or like interact with it in some way besides just like beating it up and trying to kill it. For example, during that factory heist, they chose to, and I put it there, lure a nearby red dragon out of its cave and have the dragon attack the factory to draw some of the guards away so that they could do their heisty things. They got to interact with a dragon and play a session with the dragon long before they're able to actually fight a dragon. Tip number 6 is to plan with someone else. So my nephew had to come stay with us for a while and he really wanted to learn how to DM. So we planned a session together and it was so fun. I got so many ideas. Just like having someone to bounce off ideas with was awesome. Like being a DM and just being a writer in general, you're always writing alone. It was really fun to write something with my nephew. We were able to write like an entire 2-session campaign with a really elaborate plot. It was fun bouncing ideas off each other. Because I'm a professional writer, I was able to kind of help him with the plot, and he was able to come up with really creative, cool ideas for characters and settings that we could incorporate into the story. So I would love to do that again with another like adult DM. I think it'd be really cool to write a campaign with someone else and kind of share the load. It could be something where like 2 DMs collaborate and then they each go back to their campaigns and do that session, or maybe like a 2 sessions collide type thing could be really cool. So I'd really be interested in doing that in the future, maybe when things open up a little bit more. Tip number 7. This tip is every session doesn't need to be epic and tied to the main plot. So if you're running a campaign like me, where in your head you have an overarching story idea that will probably take years to play out, it can get kind of overwhelming after a while to make every single session build on that main plot line, and sometimes you get sort of stuck, or sometimes you want your characters to level up a bit before the next major plot beat in your overarching story. So it's okay to run a session that's just a one-off, that's something goofy. Maybe it's a series of random encounters getting from A to B. So that's what I did with my last session. We had just done the factory heist the session before, which had been tons of planning for me, really involved, like a lot of work went into that heist session. Then we had the session of them fleeing the factory, and I just needed them to get from point A to point B, which was back to this like dwarven observatory, and make it feel like some stuff happened in there. I just made a random encounters table of fun things, you know, that could happen as they trekked through the woods. And I actually made 2. I didn't want them to feel steamrolled, so I let them decide whether they wanted to take the roads to get to the observatory or cut cross country. And they ended up deciding to cut cross country. So I had similar encounters planned for both, but some were more like urban, running into stuff along the roadside, and some were like deep in the woods type encounters. So I just made a table like this. Every day of their journey, they would have to roll a dice to see like what happened that day as they were walking. And there was stuff like just running across monsters. There were like some ghosts. There was some like beautiful music playing, and they followed the music, and it turned out to be a bunch of ghosts in a creepy ancient cemetery. What else? A chatty fairy dragon who they talked to and were able to get some gossip out of that little fairy dragon. And a lot of these ideas for this table, I just was like going easy on myself again, since the session before had been like so overplanned. I just Googled like random encounter ideas for D&D, I think, and plugged in the one that sounded cool into that table. And that makes it fun for the DM too, because you don't know what's going to come up. Having them roll to see what happens, that adds in like that element of chance. So, you know, sessions like the heist, where it's like very tied to the main plot, it feels super epic, but it's a ton of work for you as the DM, balancing that out with some more like low stakes sessions where they're gonna have fun, you're gonna have fun as the DM, it's not gonna be too much planning, like allow yourself a balance of both. Tip number 8 is to take familiar tropes and then flip them on their head. Or if you're queer like me, you might really enjoy queering them. Tropes are, if you're not familiar, like very familiar story elements that you see lots of places, that pretty much any story you ever read is made up of a series of tropes. So a trope can be anything from a dragon who sits on a pile of treasure. That's like a trope. It's something you see very commonly in fantasy. Having to solve a puzzle in order to unlock a door. A village where something is ravaging the sheep and you have to go figure out what is happening in the hills, making the sheep disappear. Those are all tropes. And there's a great website called tvtropes.com where you can just like click endlessly and scroll through endlessly tropes. It's like the Wikipedia of tropes. Just reading through that website is a great way to get ideas for plots, and then think about how you can take a very familiar trope and turn it on its head. Maybe instead of a dragon sitting on a pile of gold, it's a dragon sitting on a pile of garbage. I don't know why, but garbage dragon could be a cool plot. I really enjoy queering tropes. So for example, taking some of those like stock characters that have been stereotypically male and making them female or non-binary or queer can be very satisfying. Or in romance tropes, like playing with like who the partners are can be a fun way to get ideas for D&D. That being said, about having one-off sessions, having an overarching backstory really does help you get ideas and make sure that you're never stuck. It also gives the campaign an overall feeling of momentum so that it doesn't get boring. I've been a player in some other campaigns where it's just sort of dungeon, village, and it starts to feel repetitive after a while, and it doesn't give you that epic feeling. We're in the midst of nations clashing, gods playing with mortal lives, and I think that's what people are really looking for when they escape into fantasy, is a feeling of that epicness, a feeling of having the power to influence global events. That's something that a lot of us don't have, and is a big draw of fantasy, is feeling that powerful. So putting your characters in the thick of some big story can really help drive the plot forward and drive your session ideas. The final 10th tip is to just sit down and do it. So make time and space when you are going to sit down and plan your next D&D session. And if you're feeling stuck, listen to some inspiring music, follow these tips, and hopefully you'll get some ideas. I hope that was helpful. This was sort of like how to get ideas big picture, not as much of a nitty gritty starter's guide to like, if you've never DM'd before, how do you plan your very first session? I'd be happy to do a video on that as well. So if you want a like how to plan your first ever D&D session, go ahead and leave a comment and maybe I'll do that one in the future. That's it for me today. If you enjoyed this video, please let me know. If you want me to talk more about different Dungeons and Dragons stuff, go ahead and leave a comment. As always, please subscribe and help me grow my channel. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye.